The way Mark and I met could have been ripped straight from a rom-com, a chance encounter at a mutual friend's barbecue, complete with spilled drinks and awkward apologies. He was charming, with a quick wit that had me laughing despite myself. Before I knew it, we were inseparable, our love story unfolding with an ease that felt like destiny. Our wedding was a dream, a simple yet heartfelt ceremony surrounded by those we loved. Mark, with his career in finance on the rise, was the picture of success, and his insistence on a prenuptial agreement was just another part of our planning. A practical step, he said, given our differing financial situations. I didn't mind. My love for him wasn't measured in dollars and cents. But Carol, Mark's mother, was a tougher nut to crack. She looked at me like I was an unwelcome guest, her coldness stark against the warmth Mark and I shared. But love has a way of making you overlook the small stuff, and I was too happy to let her disapproval dampen my spirits. Even when we faced the heartbreaking news of Mark's infertility, my love didn't falter. If anything, it deepened. I threw myself into making our house a home, filling it with warmth and love, buying appliances and furniture with my own savings to create a cozy nest for us. But as the years passed, the warmth between us cooled, replaced by a chill I couldn't shake. Mark's demands grew. His once loving requests turned into cold commands. "Make sure breakfast is on the table before I leave, Jenna," he'd say, his voice void of the affection that used to lace his every word. Dinner? It had to be fresh, no matter how late I worked, as if my job at the Department of Health and Human Services was just a hobby compared to his high-flying career. I'd wake before dawn, bleary-eyed but determined to cook his breakfast. Then, after a long day's work, I'd rush home, racing against the clock to whip up a gourmet meal that might bring back the husband I once knew. But it was never enough. He took my efforts for granted, never once uttering a thank you, only reminding me that I should be grateful for the roof over my head. His roof. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now felt like battlegrounds. His words cut deeper with each passing day. "This is my house, Jenna. Don't forget that," he'd snap whenever I dared to suggest anything might be amiss. Each day, as I moved through our home, touching the pieces of our life I'd built with love and care, a thought began to take root in my mind. What if I were alone? The idea, once unthinkable, now felt like a bomb. My love for Mark had been replaced by a weary resignation, worn down by his indifference and coldness. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me, the realization hit me hard. I no longer recognized the man I had married, nor did I see the woman I had become in his reflection. The love that had once been my guiding light had faded, leaving behind a longing for peace, for a life where my efforts were seen, my presence valued. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, the silence of the house was a stark reminder of the distance between us. I couldn't help but wonder, would I be better off alone? The thought was a whisper in the dark, a question I wasn't quite ready to answer. But with each passing day, the whisper grew louder, a call to find myself again, to reclaim the life and love I deserved. Lately, it's like I'm living with a stranger, not the man I married. Mark's been on my case about everything, the house not being spotless, the dinners being too repetitive. It's like nothing I do is ever enough. I've been finding solace in solo trips to the mall, picking out new furniture and gadgets for our home, trying to fill the void with material things. But even that joy is fleeting. When I come home to his coldness, it all feels so meaningless. Then one day, I realized Mark hadn't put a single penny into our joint account for months. All the expenses, the mortgage, utilities, groceries, had been coming out of my paycheck. It hit me like a punch to the gut. He had been neglecting not only our marriage, but also the financial responsibilities that come with it. One evening, I decided it was time to confront him. I waited until he was settled in his armchair, flipping through the channels, and I brought it up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mark, we need to talk about the finances. You haven't contributed to the joint account in months." "I've been covering everything," I said, hoping for some understanding, maybe even an apology. He barely glanced at me, his eyes still on the TV. "It's my house, you're just living in it. Why should I pay for your keep? He shot back, his words as sharp as knives. Knives. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Your keep? Mark, I'm your wife, not some tenant. I've been paying for everything, trying to make this house a home for both of us. I argued, feeling my temper rise. He snorted, a sound that made my skin crawl. Look, Jenna, you're making a big deal out of nothing. If you don't like it, maybe you should just leave. But we both know you've got nowhere to go, he said, turning back to his show. I was seething, hurt and angry. But before I could respond, his phone rang. It was his mother, Carol. He answered on speakerphone, and before I could escape, she started in on me. Jenna, you need to stop this nonsense and start showing some gratitude. Mark's been too good to you, and here you are acting like a freeloader. Carol's voice was like a slap in the face. I was so shocked, I barely managed to grab the phone and hang up. I can't believe you and your mother calling me a freeloader in my own home, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. Mark just shrugged, unfazed. Well, if the shoe fits. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than ever. The thought of divorce crept into my mind again, more persistent this time. But where would I go? I had no apartment, no real savings of my own. I felt trapped in a life that no longer felt like mine, married to a man who saw me as nothing more than a burden. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed and a heavy heart. As I made my way through the silent house, every room echoed with the remnants of last night's fight. I knew something had to change, but the fear of the unknown, of starting over from scratch, was paralyzing. Sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee alone, I realized I had to make a decision. Do I stay in this loveless marriage, playing the role of the grateful freeloader? Or do I take a leap into the unknown, hoping to land on my feet? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was, I couldn't go on like this. The breaking point had been reached, and it was time to choose my path. That day at work felt like a marathon, one meeting after another, no end in sight. I glanced at the clock, knowing Mark would be fuming. Just my luck, I muttered under my breath. Finally, I grabbed my phone to give him a heads up. The moment he picked up, I knew I was in for it. This is your problem, Jenna, not mine. You should have been here cooking dinner, not playing around at work. Mark's voice roared through the phone, loud enough for the whole office to hear. My cheeks burned as I quickly ended the call, avoiding the curious glances from my colleagues. By the time I got home, it was late, way past our usual dinner time. The house was dark, silent, but the moment I stepped inside, Mark was on me like a thunderstorm. Where have you been? A good wife would have had dinner waiting. What are you even good for? His words were like daggers, each one slicing through the last bit of patience I had. I was tired, emotionally drained. Mark, I had to work. You know how important this project is. I tried to explain, but it was like talking to a wall. A bad wife and a terrible. He started, cutting me off mid-sentence, his anger brewing like a storm ready to break. Like freedom, a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. I had always thought that leaving Mark would be the hardest part, but the weight I had carried for so long had lifted with every step away from that life. The apartment, though modest, felt like a sanctuary. The walls, though empty, were filled with possibilities. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have to measure my worth by someone else's expectations. I woke up when I wanted to, made meals for myself when I wanted to, and did things that made me happy without the looming weight of someone else's approval. It was as if the fog had lifted, and I was finally able to see clearly. As the days passed, I realized I was rebuilding, not just physically, but emotionally. Each day, I reclaimed pieces of myself that had been lost in that toxic relationship. There were days when the silence of the apartment felt too loud, but even in those moments, I knew I was taking back my life. One day, as I sat with a cup of coffee, staring out the window, I realized something profound. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I had my own space, my own rhythm, and most importantly, my own sense of self-worth. It was a slow process, but with each passing day, I was gaining strength, and the pieces of my identity that Mark and Carol had tried to take from me were falling back into place. The phone calls from Carol stopped, though I wasn't sure if it was because she had realized her words had no power over me anymore or if she simply didn't care. Either way, I no longer dreaded her calls. Work was more fulfilling too. With Mark out of the picture, I didn't have to worry about rushing home to make dinner or keep up appearances. My boss had become not just a supervisor but a mentor, helping me navigate this new chapter of my life. I felt empowered, confident, like I could take on whatever came my way. I started reconnecting with old friends, the ones I had drifted away from in the chaos of my marriage. The laughter, the shared moments of joy, it was like I was rediscovering the version of myself I had left behind. I began to enjoy my own company again, reading books I had forgotten I loved, taking long walks in the park, and even trying my hand at cooking new recipes just for the pleasure of it. Every step I took forward felt like a victory. The future was no longer a place filled with fear of what might happen next, but a space for endless possibilities. I could see the world opening up, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited for what was to come. A few months passed, and as the seasons changed, so did I. I found strength in my independence, confidence in my decisions, and joy in my own presence. No longer weighed down by the expectations of others, I was free to create the life I had always dreamed of. And then one evening, while I was relaxing with a glass of wine on my balcony, I received a message from an old acquaintance, someone I hadn't heard from in years. It was the first step toward a new chapter, and I smiled, knowing that life was about to surprise me once again. Morning routines. These were the things that I had worked hard for, the things that had never once been appreciated. They were, in many ways, the physical representation of the sacrifices I had made for a marriage that had never valued me. I carefully gathered all the receipts and made a mental list of everything I had purchased over the years. This was mine, my contribution to the life we had shared, even if it had been taken for granted. But now, it was time to reclaim it. I wasn't going to let Mark take anything from me, not even the things I had paid for, the things I had worked so hard to make our home. The next few days were a blur of packing and organizing. I had no intention of leaving anything behind. If I was leaving that life, I was leaving it all. I meticulously documented every item I had purchased over the years, the appliances, the furniture, the things that I had poured my money and energy into while Mark sat back and did nothing. Once everything was packed and ready, I made the call. The plan was simple. I was going to retrieve the items that were rightfully mine, and I wasn't going to feel guilty about it. Mark's financial mess and his failure to appreciate me were no longer my problems. I arrived at the house that had once been mine, the house where I had spent so many sleepless nights, trying to make it feel like home. As I walked through the door, the memories hit me like a wave. The good ones, the bad ones, all of them tangled up in the years we had spent together. But this time, I wasn't walking through the door as a wife trying to please her husband. I was walking through the door as someone who was finally taking control of her own life. I made my way to the kitchen first, where the sleek dishwasher sat. I paused for a moment, remembering how Mark had praised it when we bought it, how he had insisted on the best of everything. But now, it was just another item in a long list of things that he had never truly appreciated. I unscrewed the dishwasher, careful not to damage it, and moved it into the car. Next, I headed to the laundry room. The washing machine, the one I had paid for in full after Mark had forgotten to contribute his share, was still sitting there, looking as out of place as ever. I didn't hesitate. I packed it up too, another victory for me. By the time I was done, the car was packed with everything I had bought, everything I had made sacrifices for, everything that had once been a symbol of a life I had hoped would be full of love and respect. The following days were filled with a sense of accomplishment I hadn't expected. I had taken back control of the things I had once thought were insignificant, and now they were symbols of my newfound independence. My apartment, though small, had everything I needed. The appliances I had brought with me were a reminder of my strength, my resilience, and my determination to never settle for less than I deserved. The real victory, however, was internal. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. I didn't need Mark or Carol or anyone else to define my worth. I had created my own life, one where I called the shots. And for the first time in ages, I could finally breathe without the weight of their expectations on my shoulders. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the sense of freedom grew stronger. I was no longer living in the shadow of a man who never saw me, or a mother-in-law who never respected me. I was living for myself, and that was enough. As I sat in my living room one evening, surrounded by the items I had fought so hard to reclaim, I realized something profound. I had not only taken back my belongings, but I had taken back my life. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I was no longer the woman who feared rejection or who lived in the shadows of someone else's expectations. I was Jenna, strong, independent, and free. And whatever the future held, I was ready for it. Creativity. I set up a small corner of my apartment for painting, and as I dipped my brush into the vibrant colors, I felt a sense of liberation. Each stroke was a declaration of my newfound freedom, a freedom I had fought hard for, a freedom that no one could take from me. The apartment was modest, but it was mine. It was my sanctuary, my refuge from the chaos of my past. I decorated it with pieces that reflected who I was now, not who I had been in that marriage. The walls were a soft shade of gray, calm and peaceful, with framed art that I had made myself. The living room had a cozy feel, with a plush couch and a small coffee table where I could relax and enjoy the quiet. It was a place where I could breathe, think, and be myself. Over time, I began to rediscover parts of myself that I had buried beneath years of trying to please others. I started taking more risks, stepping outside my comfort zone in ways I never thought I would. I signed up for an art class, joined a local hiking group, and even started making time for meditation and yoga. I was building a life that was mine and mine alone, and it felt like the first time I was truly living. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my apartment, sipping tea and watching the sunset, I realized how far I had come. It wasn't just about the apartment, the possessions, or the money. It was about the person I had become. The woman who had been broken, mistreated, and unheard was now strong, independent, and in control of her own future. I had learned to trust myself again, to believe in my worth, and to let go of the toxic relationships that had held me back. The decision to leave Mark, to walk away from the life we had built together, had been the hardest thing I had ever done. But it was also the best thing I had ever done for myself. 6 months later, I stood on the edge of a new beginning. I had made peace with the past, and was no longer haunted by the ghost of the woman I had been. I had built a life that was entirely mine, one where I was the author of my own story. The path ahead was uncertain, but I no longer feared the unknown. The thought of dating again, of opening my heart to someone else, had crossed my mind. But for now, I was content focusing on myself. I had learned that true happiness came from within, and I wasn't going to rush into anything that might jeopardize the peace I had worked so hard to create. I spent my days pursuing my passions, connecting with new people, and embracing the freedom that came with being in control of my own destiny. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I had made the right choices. But those moments were fleeting, drowned out by the overwhelming sense of peace that had settled into my soul. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. The future had always seemed like a distant dream, something I'd never be able to grasp. But now, standing in the midst of a life I had carefully and courageously built, it felt real. Max by my side, the apartment that had become my sanctuary, the art that had blossomed into a passion, and even the unexpected connection with someone who truly saw me, all of it was more than I could have imagined just a year ago. Life had surprised me, and I had learned to welcome the unexpected. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Each morning was a new opportunity, and each day brought its own kind of peace. No longer did I feel the weight of someone else's expectations, nor did I have to measure my worth based on anyone else's standards. The only standard that mattered now was mine. As I walked alongside Max, the light filtering through the trees, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for all the lessons that had brought me here. The pain, the struggle, the heartbreak, it had all been worth it. It had shaped me into someone who no longer feared the unknown, someone who trusted in her own strength, and someone who had finally found her true self. The journey wasn't over, and perhaps it would never be. Life would continue to challenge me, to throw obstacles in my way, but I knew now that I could handle whatever came. I was no longer afraid. I was ready for the next chapter, whatever it might hold. And so, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, I stood there, grounded in the present, knowing that the future was bright, ready to step forward into the light. Please feel free to comment below if you like this. Remember to like and subscribe for more.